family, it wasn't that we were taught that not telling the truth was a bad thing. It's just that we didn't really talk about things at all. Well, not the important things. We didn't talk about things like your feelings, not in the way of understanding what your feelings were and what they meant. We didn't talk about money, and we certainly didn't talk about sex. So as a child, when you grow up in a house that you don't talk about things like feelings and money and sex, is that they become taboo. And when a topic is taboo, what comes along with that is shamefulness, and that you're bad. That last part, that shamefulness and bad, that's what leads to not telling the truth. Because as kids, we don't want to be bad. We don't want to be labeled as bad when we're little kids. That comes later when we're teenagers. But as children, we don't want to be labeled as bad. And in the house I grew up in, the adults that were around in my family and our extended family, they just didn't talk about things. They didn't share what was going on. And we had lots of fun. There was lots of great things that happened, and I watched the entire range of emotion. It's just that it was usually misdirected. And so again, no one was lying. It's just that no one was telling the truth. So in the summer of '76, when I was physically, emotionally, and sexually assaulted by a couple of older girls in the neighborhood, I didn't tell anybody. At 15, when I was raped while I was babysitting, neither myself nor the lady I babysat for said anything about the bloody sheets I'd stuffed in her closet. And when I ended up in the hospital at 16, bent over with abdominal pain, I refused to admit that I was sexually active. That last piece, I would pay a very high price for that in my life. The one thing that I knew to be true when I was a child was what I was going to do when I grew up. I knew for certain that I was going to be a mother and a wife. The mother part was the important part. I thought you had to be a wife to be a mother, so that's why I threw that one in there. I was that preteen and teenager that spent her weekends and her summers babysitting kids. I'd go to the family reunion and you'd find me on the ground with the little ones playing. I loved it. It was the one thing that I knew I would be good at. In truth, it was the only thing that I truly believed that I would be really good at. So that time when I was 16 and I woke up in the morning, bent over in tremendous pain, more cramping, more pain than I'd ever experienced in my life, I called for my mother. And she walked in the room and she took one look at me, laying there, sweating and pale and shaking, and she called for my dad. And my dad walked in and he said, "Jeannie, take her to the hospital." So off we went. And they put me in one of those private rooms, with the green curtain all around that no one could possibly hear anything that's going on behind it. And the doctor and my mom were in the room, and my doctor was asking a lot of questions, none of which I remember except for one. He asked me if I was sexually active. I said no, adamantly. And my mother said, "It's okay, you can tell the truth, you won't be in trouble." Come on. You really going to try to tell me I wasn't going to be in trouble for something that I'd been told was bad and shameful for all my life? I was not getting tricked into that. So I said no. Eventually, the doctor and my mom left the room, and a little while later, a nurse came in, and she was coming in to check my vitals. Didn't take her long to sit on the edge of my bed and take my hand and look me in the eyes and ask me the same question. And she said, It's okay. I promise you won't be in trouble. And I have to tell you, I so desperately wanted to tell her the truth. But I couldn't. I just couldn't. And so they went in, the surgeon, and they removed my appendix. Afterwards, he said, well, there was actually nothing wrong with your appendix, but I don't know if you know this, but apparently your appendix is useless. So he said it would likely have to come out eventually, so they just took it. And once I'd recovered, there was no more pain, so all was well. Everything was great. A couple of years later, I was living with the man that I was actually having sex with when I wouldn't actually admit to being sexually active at 16. And one day I went to the doctor, and I was sitting in his office, and he said some really magical words. He said, Jill, you're pregnant. I burst into tears. It was like the happiest day of my life. I couldn't believe this. I was going to be a mom. My dream was coming true. It was amazing. I knew I was going to have to tell my parents, and I knew it was going to be hard. My mother was a practicing Catholic, and quite frankly, she was already pissed that I was living in sin. But it had to happen. So off we went to my parents' place, and I said, Mom and Dad, I have something that I need to tell you. I'm pregnant. I'll never forget the look on my dad's face. He was like, he lit up like a light bulb. He was thrilled, so freaking happy about this. It would be their first grandchild. And then my mom lost her shit. And she said things like, this is going to ruin your life. And this is terrible. And she cried. I know that she loved me, and I know that it was an attempt to express her fear. And so when I left there, I was upset, of course, but nothing could have taken away how happy I was about being pregnant. 3 days later, I started to bleed. I grew up in a very small town, so we went to the local hospital, and they confirmed that I was having a miscarriage. And they sent me to the hospital in a bigger town so they could do what's called a D&C, where they clean out your womb. And on the way there, we stopped at my parents' place. I opened the door. My dad took one look at me, and he wrapped me in his arms while I wept. I have never felt that much pain. That was to be the first of 3 miscarriages. And the final one was what they call an ectopic pregnancy. It got stuck in my tube. And they let it go so long that it exploded. And so I lost that side. For the next 14 years, every month, I prayed. Through the end of that marriage, through the boyfriends in between, into the second marriage. The one thing I wanted more than anything in my life was to be a mother, to have a baby, to actually grow this child in my womb, and I wanted the whole experience. I wanted the big belly. I wanted the boobs that went with the big belly. I wanted to experience what it was like to give birth to a child. And so every month I prayed. I hoped. I bled. And I grieved. And this went on until I was 35 years old, when I finally went and found myself a good gynecologist. And this particular one specialized in infertility and difficult pregnancies. So they did this test. It's called a laparoscopy, where they put a scope in through your belly button, and they take a look around, see what's going on in there. Afterwards, in his office, when I was getting the news as to what was happening, it was a very challenging day. What he told me was that I had about a 5% chance of actually ever getting pregnant. And if I decided somehow to get pregnant, whether it was naturally or in vitro, the risk was much too high, that my life would be on the line. And then he dropped the bomb. Remember when I was 16 and I wouldn't admit that I was sexually active? Well, it turned out that that was actually my first ectopic pregnancy. That first time I was in the hospital, I was actually pregnant, and it was stuck in the tube, and it had caused scar tissue. On the other side, there was scar tissue already from them removing my appendix. So for all that time, there was very little chance of me getting pregnant, and quite miraculous that I ever had again. Not telling the truth at that age cost me the one thing I wanted more than anything in my life. Since that time, I've found a lot of grace and a lot of love in all of it. I've actually had a hand in raising some pretty amazing human beings. I am Mama Jill to a few of them, Aunt Jill to others, and there's some that I've just come into their lives for a season when they were struggling to help them through. And I'm still a mother to 4, none of who are living. I'd like you to ask yourself now what it is that you aren't telling the truth about in your life. It could be anything. Maybe you've experienced a trauma that you've buried and not talked about. Or perhaps you've caused someone else some pain. I know what that's like because hurt people. So after I'd done my healing, there were people I needed to apologize to. Or perhaps there's an area of your life that's messy. Money, your house, relationships. Whatever it is that you are not telling the truth about, it is holding you hostage in your own life. There's a very high cost. It's hurting your heart and most likely impacting your health. It doesn't have to be that way. You can change all of that. The one thing that came out of this for me is that I am a truth teller. I understand the impact of not telling the truth because I paid a very high cost for that. And now it is at the very center of the work that I offer in the world. I walk people through their secrets so that they can get to the light of truth on the other side. And so I'd like you to consider this right now an invitation, a permission slip, if you will, to tell the truth about your own life. It will change you. And so, my friends, find a way. Tell the truth and free yourself. Thank you.